Okay, so it is recording. Hopefully everybody's okay with that.
Do I get royalties?
Sure, yeah, you do. Yep, I'll send you all the 100,
All the
100%.
profit.
That's right. All right, and some people are visible and some just have their screen name up.
They're in their pajamas already.
Yep, that's okay. That's the great thing about Zoom.
I
You
know.
know? Yeah.
Teaching with Zoom, I got to see all the students hanging out in their bedrooms.
Well, no, that's not the good thing, though. Yeah. Yeah, trying to have people fully present in a Zoom class can be challenging. There's some more folks coming in. I'll move my screen around a little bit. All right, so it's 7:05. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to keep admitting people. So anyway, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We've got about 34 people online, which is great. It's great to have everybody here. I'm Mark Rigsby. I'm the gallery director, and I'm thankful that we have Zoom to be able to do this, and everybody can enjoy this lecture in the comfort of their own homes. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our juror and visiting artist, Susan Palmisano. I'm going to read a little bit of her bio, so just kind of bear with me. It's a condensed version while I'm also trying to admit people to the room. Let's see. So Susan's a professional painter, and she's also a recently retired professor from Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where she taught from 1994 to 2020, so a very long career teaching. And she also coordinated their MA and MFA programs in art. Her paintings have been shown in more than 70 national and international exhibitions. Her work was recently exhibited at Limner Gallery in New York, the Women's Caucus for the Arts in Washington, D.C., Gallery 263 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Cooley Gallery in Leesburg, Virginia, and Westmoreland Museum of Art in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Other notable exhibitions include solo exhibitions at the Mercado Velo Gallery in Tondela, Portugal, the Hedgevik Gallery in Budapest, Hungary, Can Serrat in Barcelona, Spain, Gallery 402 in New York City, New York, the Art Academy, University of Zagreb, Croatia, L.H. Horton Gallery in Stockton, California, and another solo show at the Contemporary Art Gallery in Opole, Poland, and I probably mispronounced some of those names. In addition to her exhibition career, she has also been invited as a visiting professor in numerous locations internationally, at Ganesh University in
Indonesia.
Singaraja, Bali, Petra Christian University in Surabaya, Java, Wenzhou University in China, the University of Opole, Poland, and the Institute of Art at Zagreb, Croatia. She also served as professor. Oh, I already mentioned that. So she's had an extensive career teaching and showing her work. She's basically shown all over the globe. So a really impressive career, and we love her painting. She actually had an exhibition here also at the University of Southern Mississippi a few years ago, and that's how I became familiar with Susan's work. So we're really delighted to have her here, and she did a wonderful job during this exhibition. It was a really challenging task. I think we had over 400 entries in the show, and from that, I think 45 pieces or so were selected. It's a pretty dense show, and we did the best we could to install the exhibition. Hopefully some of you have had an opportunity to come see the show. It actually closes tomorrow, so if you haven't, If you want to make the trip, we'd love for you to come see the show in the gallery. But we've had a lot of really good attendance. It's a beautiful exhibition, and we're thankful to all the artists that are participating in the show. So I'm going to hand it over to Susan. So tonight Susan's going to talk a little bit about her work for a little while, and then after that. She might kind of talk about the show a little bit, and then we will present the awards. We'll go through the award winners. And so if you're waiting on that, and you can come and go as you like. And then we'll also have some time for some Q&A, some questions. And so if you have some questions during the talk, if you want to kind of add that into a chat or raise your hand, use the little, you can either put your hand up, I'll try to keep my eye on everybody, or put up the little hand in Zoom, or you can type a question in the chat. I'll try to interject, and I'll try to, monitor this the best I can. Okay? All right. Okay, Susan, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we're excited to see some of your work.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. And I'm so excited to be invited to come and speak with you. And also can't tell you how much I appreciated the opportunity to look at your work. I think there were over 700 applicants.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think there were like 750 paintings that I looked at. It was very hard making a decision and whittling it down.
Right.
Took quite a bit of time, but I think it turned out to be a really good show. Unfortunately, a lot of people who did really good work, I wasn't able to include because there just wasn't enough space. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in the show. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. So give me a few minutes so I can get that up and running. Share. All right, whoops. All right, I'm going to also get rid of some of these images here. Let me do this. All right. So again, good evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm going to kind of take you through about 30 years of my work. It will not take 30 years to talk about, I hope, but I wanted you to see that I really work in very distinct bodies of work. And let me see how I can move this along here. Alrighty. All right. So anyways, I work in very distinct bodies of work. And so I'm going to take you through some of those over a period really of 30 years, really my professional career. And even though each body of work evolves from one to the next, they transition and change a little bit between each one. But over those years, when I was reflecting back on my work, I realized that there's really an overall broad theme that ties most of that work together. And it's really about questioning what it means to be human in today's contemporary culture. And a lot of my thinking, a lot of my ideas and themes were really shaped by my personal experience and also the world events and you'll see. But also, my concepts evolved, but went through a really kind of a radical change where I moved from or shifted from a Western point of view to a more Eastern perspective when I became really interested in Buddhism about 10 years ago. And that's when really the greatest shift occurred. And we'll talk about that when I get to it. But my journey really begins when I started asking what it meant to be a female in today's society. I was really interested in that idea of identity and trying to understand the concept of woman and how that idea of woman is really culturally constructed. Another thing that is important to know is, I was in school in the 80s. Yes, I am really that old, and I don't use a cane yet. My professional career really started in the 90s. And that was the 80s and 90s were a time when there was this real interest in the art world about identity. And that was also fueled by the influence of feminism within art. And you'll see that that was quite a bit of influence in my work. In the early 90s, I took my first tenure track position in Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia. So I'm going to begin with this work. I moved from Ohio, where I grew up, and moved to the swamps of Statesboro, Georgia. And this is a picture of my backyard. I lived in a rural area. This, literally, my back door went right up to the swamps. I'm sure living in southern Mississippi, you probably are familiar with this scene. It was new to me, but it really informed a lot of my work. I'm also a mother of a severely handicapped child. This is my son, Christopher. He's in a wheelchair. He's severely mentally challenged. And I was a single parent at the time. And so a lot of my work is informed by that challenge and the vulnerabilities of being a single parent of a severely handicapped child. So those two really important things play together in terms of creating this body of work, what I call the Gardens of Delight. And so these you can see were really influenced by the landscape that I lived in. And you can sort of capture the sense of the swamp. But I use the landscape as a metaphor. And actually I was referencing as chestnut that I was finding on the ground that were really pointy and sharp on the outside and very soft in the interior. But they worked as metaphors for the womb or a nest, and what it meant to be dealing with the challenges and fears of being a single parent, trying to be protective, but also being vulnerable. And so you can see that influence of the swamp, but also that landscape worked as a metaphor. And here's another, these are just a couple samples of the work that I was doing at that time. And that work, I started to realize that everyone was seeing that work as really the sexualized, from a sexual point of view. And they were really not reading it from my perspective of being vulnerable and what that meant as a metaphor. And it recalled my knowledge of George O'Keeffe, where she always refrained and resisted the interpretation of her flower paintings as anything sexual. Most people will analyze her work as a very sexual female body forms, but she always refused to allow that interpretation. She kept saying that they were just flowers because she wanted to be the subject within her painting. She didn't want to be the objective of the object. She didn't want to be objectified. And so I found that was a similar problem that I was having in my own work, trying to be the subject within my work as opposed to the object of the sexual, my sexualized body. So that led me to this group of paintings called The Faces of Good and Evil. I did a series of self-portraits, and I tried to deny that objectification or the male gaze, and move through creating these images where the body was sort of denied the beauty, and created this very thin skin where you could move from the outside into the interior. I really wanted them to be read psychologically and about the interior and about my mind as opposed to the body. So I was kind of creating these not particularly beautiful images so that they couldn't be objectified. But what I found was that I ended up sort of triggering an old trope about the hysterical female. When I was trying to get at the emotional aspects or the psychological aspects, a lot of people then would interpret it within that, females are all emotional, they're all hysterical. And so I moved on from that and created a body of work called Eating Lessons. And these images were of chocolate truffles. And this was for that show I had in New York City. I created 80 of these. They're on wood boxes. They're 11 inches by 11. I was using alkyd resins that I would pour on top. And these were all paintings of chocolate truffles. I really like the metaphor of using food and the idea of consuming food as a way of going from accessing the exterior to the interior of the subject. It was also a time when I was also, or had just moved out of, I guess, but I was referring back to a time when I was dealing with my own eating disorder. The more I reflect upon this idea of eating disorder was really how so many young women, and I'm coming from a women's point of view here, that a lot of eating disorders arise from our desire to conform to socially encoded definitions of femininity. And this was something that I was struggling with when I was a young woman. And often person who is dealing with eating disorders or an anorexic really sees fatness as a loss of control, a failure of acceptable feminine identity. I'm glad to see that in the current world that kind of narrative is starting to dissipate, but to the anorexic, that is very real. Of course, it's more complex than that, but I'm trying to keep it under like 3 hours to talk about the topic. But anyways, when an anorexic refuses to eat, she tries to take control of her body. And ironically, then she ends up consuming herself. And you think about many of our religions, they teach food as an abstinence of food as a ritual for purification, that it's linked with both evil and holiness. And if you think about Eve, she was the first femme fatale who was, fell into eternal damnation because she ate an apple. So that, we could go on and on with the religions and how they sort of feed into this. But I also thought of chocolate as a guilty pleasure, and it's sort of triggered within the viewer, I hope, or what I try to do, this idea of indulgence and abstinence and creating that tension. So from those chocolate pieces, I pushed a little further into thinking about dreams. And I created these are a little bit smaller. They're also on wood panel. I worked a little bit more with the alkyd resins. And I remember things that Freud had said about dreams. Dreams are where our fears are free to roam. And so I started thinking about that and started creating these, like what I call little chocolate nightmares. Because chocolate and the way that an anorexic thinks about food, it sort of creates, triggers all these fears about their body. And as I was getting older, I began to struggle with that acceptance of the process that, and also I was in conflict with our culture's obsession with youth and beauty and thinness. And I think a lot of women also struggle with that. So I started creating these little hybrid images where I collapsed bodily references with the chocolate. And I wanted to create a silhouette. When I dream, believe it or not, I dream in black and white. I know it's strange as a painter who works with color to dream in black and white. But I also, when I dream, I think of really strange lighting, like film noir. So I really try to capture that sense of a silhouette. I also think in the silhouette, it creates a little bit more mystery, a little bit more sense of that fear. So I was creating these sort of strange, sort of little chocolate nightmares where kind of logical connections were condensed. A couple more examples of that. And those I did for that show out in, I think one was in Santa Fe, and then they went out to California for that show. I decided then to start incorporating the use of the figure. And so these were a little bit larger paintings. And rather than using the metaphor of an object to tell the story, I was trying to capture what it felt like, that sense of longing, that awareness of the emptiness, that feeling really disconnected from yourself when you're trying to achieve a certain sense of perfection that really isn't possible. There's a philosopher named Jacques Lacan. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of him. He was a follower of Freud. I have a lot of problems with his theories, but there was one thing that he spoke about that really hit home for me. And he talks about the emotion of desire as a sense of longing for something that one does not possess. Desire is an awareness of an emptiness, a desire to fulfill an emptiness. So these paintings that I did that were figurative, really were trying to capture that disconnected sense of floating, what it felt like. So I used a lot of ground that was shifting to stabilize the subject, dispersive points of view. This painting I did for that show in Poland. It was actually a solo show, but this was one of the pieces that went in it. This is actually 6 separate pieces that bolt together in the back. And I brought all my paintings. I made them to fit the size of my suitcase because I didn't want to send them through customs. Sort of like you painted the back, the size of your car. I painted to the size of my suitcase. And so I wanted to capture that idea of the dream and how one thing triggers another, and they don't really seem to make any sense together, but it's sort of that strangeness that happens and that sense of disconnect. And I think I have a close-up of this. So you can see I still was working with the alkyd resins, still thinking about the silhouette. Here's some more images. I was actually, for my reference material, I took underwater, I had a hot tub at the time, and I was taking underwater images of myself to use as reference and try to capture that kind of, and turning the jets on. So I had all that foamy water and trying to capture some of that. So it got to a certain point, and this is about, I just went over 20 years worth of work in a very few minutes. So at about that time, I really started to kind of burn out on what I wanted to say. I felt like I reached a wall with it. But it also came at a time when I became really interested in Buddhism. And in fact, that is where I met my husband, who was a Buddhist monk, and I really started to learn a lot about Buddhism, and that change really affected how I think about the world and how I think about identity. And so, and in doing so, I needed to come up with some new images. And starting to rethink what I thought about in terms of identity. This is by a quote from Rosemary Betterman, who was a famous feminist writer. And she really talks about how our identity as females, and I kind of globalize it to humans, are really always in flux because we are made up of so many different things. Our individual narratives are very complex and they're always changing. They're part of our history, part of everything that happens to us every day. And we're constantly reworking ourselves. We are never static. And there is no global sort of stereotypic idea of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be human. We are a work in progress, each one of us. At the same time, I was learning how to scuba dive, and I saw my experience with scuba diving to be really informative to my new way of thinking. When you are a scuba diver, you try to create the skill of neutral buoyancy, where you neither sink nor rise in the water or float. You try to keep a certain equilibrium where you're sort of one with that water. You kind of go with the flow. You're not fighting against it. And you use your breath to move to either to keep yourself at a certain buoyancy and try to remain neutral. And I realized that's really how I was starting to rethink this idea of identity. So much of my work had been about, kind of requiring the recognition by another person to define who I was or define what a woman was, and really required the other. And instead, it's really not, it's much more complex than that, that it's, we are, constantly shifting and always in transformation, and that labels confine. So I went back to the landscape, probably because of my interest in scuba diving, but I felt that the reference to the landscape made sense because the landscape is never static. It's always interdependent on everything around it, and it's always changing. It's a very dynamic process, and each moment, every season, every change is just as beautiful as the last. And if you come back to the same place 10 years from now, it's going to be completely different because so many things have changed in the meantime. So I really saw the landscape as an interesting metaphor for how that shifted. Now, this body of work was also very transitional for me, where I am now. I worked for several years creating work It was really pretty awful. And I'll bare your eyeballs from the bad work that I created. So I'm just showing you a couple of samples. Um, this was work I did in a artist residency in Budapest, where I was still searching for that new reference material. And I was looking at the coral and so forth at the time. These are little gouache paintings. And you can start to see where I started to shift to geometric and organic forms, away from more of the landscape reference. So I think that the Beginner's Mind series was, I think, the beginning of the more mature work from this new sort of perspective on what it means to be human. This painting is called Child's Play. I think it helps explain why I went to the language of abstraction. I really wanted to work with organic and geometric forms, and really think about how those seemingly incongruent forms could coexist in a harmonious way, and how these different images can blend and fold into one another in this kind of endless flow of transformation. And this quote here, I think by a famous Chinese master, also helps explain a little bit about how my thinking was. This is a famous kind of teaching quote in Zen Buddhism. And what it means is, when you look at mountains, and when we say, or we talk about mountains, what happens is we get a picture in our head of what a mountain is, a representation of it. Then we realize that that representation, that picture, is just a picture. It's really not the mountain. And then we begin to realize that once we recognize the difference between our representation and what the mountain really is, which is a very complex, forms, and with all kinds of air and water and all that stuff, we can be a little bit more one with that particular mountain, that the representation separates us from the mountain. When we can accept what the real mountain is, we can be more one with it. I probably botched that explanation, but that's as close as I can get. So anyway, so what I did is I moved, the reason I brought that quote up is because there was a process I wanted to relate this to in terms of understanding what it means to be human. I chose abstraction because I wanted the viewer to move through a specific process where first most people who are unfamiliar with art have a hard time with abstraction. They don't know quite how to look at it or what to do with it. They don't know how to see it. And so first thing that they do is they look at the work and they try to name things in it. They try to figure out what's going on. They try to pinpoint it to a landscape or something. And at a certain point, they get a little frustrated and realize they can't do that. And then they allow themselves to just accept it for the color and the shape and the movement. And once they do that, then they're realizing they're just accepting it as a painting, that it is just color and shape. And that's sort of the process I want us to move through, or what I think is important for us to move through in understanding what it means to be human, is to let go of all those labels, get rid of all the representation, and just be and accept that person for them in their essence and their being, and to let go of all the constructs. This painting here, I called A Beautiful Mind. It's that title came from a famous movie where a Yale professor, scientist, had schizophrenia. And so rather than go about trying to, take medications and deny who he was, he learned over time to come to acceptance with this certain part of his self and integrate it so that it could live harmoniously together with it. So he accepted who he was. He integrated all these different incongruent parts in his life, and he became a whole person, and learned how to live harmoniously through that. And that was actually a true movie based on a true story. at the same time, I was doing these smaller paintings where, I was looking at shapes that could, kind of pull apart and bring back together, and really thinking about those as form. I did a whole series of these. This brings me to my On Being series, which takes a little bit more of a shift. This was actually, and this whole series was in your show. I did these works specifically for your show, for the show in Mississippi. And I began to realize this is the time when politics started to go a little haywire, in my opinion, and things started to go a little crazy. And I started to see our country being pulled apart, and all the anger and we were really dehumanizing one another. And I was painting this painting when the mothers and the children were being separated at the border, and these children were taken from their mother's arms and never saw them again. And as a mother, I just could not imagine what that was like. And children were being put in cages, and they were these immigrants, or seeking asylum, whether through legal or illegal, whatever. They were still leaving and going through this arduous journey because they were so desperate, but instead they were treated so inhumanely. And I, really struggled with that. So I was, when I was painting this painting, I was really thinking about bringing all these, acceptance of all these differences, and accepting all the pain, and thinking about our own immigrant background, and all the pain and hurt, that our own ancestors went through. And so politics in the larger collective started to inform a lot of the work in how we treat each other, in how we dehumanize one another, and how we can find humanity within each other. So this piece actually was just purchased by Microsoft for their permanent collection. And I was painting it when Christine Blasey Ford was testifying in the Brett Kavanaugh testimony for the Supreme Court. And so I started thinking about how privilege and how we have a hierarchy or class system that sets some people with more power than others. And even today, like last year, and current Black Lives Matter, and how much that privilege affects our balance of power. And the four corner proof, really, I was thinking about how we've been gaslit for so many years now, that we're being told to see something that we're not seeing, or what we're seeing isn't true. And it's really pulling us as a country apart from the interior, from the inside, and pulling us to, out, and pulling us to the margins. We're not coming together, we're being pulled from the inside out because of our disconnection with the truth, because of the way that we're being lied to all the time. And this is a similar thing, where four possibilities of true and false is what's real and what's not anymore. Who knows anymore? There's so much misinformation. The media is talking, telling us one thing, our politicians are telling us another. We don't even know what's real anymore. And so trying to pull those things together, but recognizing that this is a, crisis in our. This piece is actually in a show right now in Cincinnati. It's been in several museums at this point. And I was thinking of this painting in terms of how important it is that our ancestors and our history inform who we are, but not to allow it to define us. That we can evolve and change. We have our roots, but it's an important part of who we are. It can help center us, but it also doesn't define us. This piece here, I think, represents a little bit more about where I'm moving to now, where rather than being pulled apart, I'm looking for that space where we can all meet together, transform, and exchange our ideas, and, more come together, I suppose. The next several paintings I was doing during the Hurricane Katrina, or Hurricane Maria, when it went through Puerto Rico. And all of the unfortunate kind of dehumanizing we were doing of the Puerto Rican people, and all the rhetoric around that, and making them feel like they were not adequate, and how their country was being pulled apart, and there was nothing very kind being said about them. And this painting here, Still Mine, is really about the eye of the hurricane, where I had you stay still and let the hurricane pass around you, or the tornadoes pass around you, and stay centered, stay still. This is a very Buddhist thought, where you just stay still and let the tornado pass. Untethered, of course, in terms of really responding to, hearing and listening to that hurricane, and how things were being blown apart, and how we as people are getting blown apart a little bit. Again, a little bit more references to hurricanes and sheltering in place. Sorry, went that real quick. Pointing to the moon a little bit more in terms of, hope and entering the stream. This takes me to my current body of work that I'm working on now. And so I'm moving from sort of using forms as an object to represent sort of the body or a person in some ways, and really thinking about space, that liminal space. And I came across this quote by a woman who does attunement therapy. And I really love this quote. She said, "When we are attuned, we are making genuine efforts to understand another's emotions. This does not involve attempts to change someone or assess another's accuracy in a situation or conflict. Rather, it is more like turning toward another with a curious and open heart." So I really see this Attuned Heart series, is what I called it, as creating spaces, a place where we can look at each other and accept each other and try to come to some harmony with one another. So I'm really more interested in the spaces of these. And so sort of creating that, maybe a boundary. The paintings became a little flatter with the forms, more pattern-like, and then playing that off with more of a liminal or ethereal space. Where we can, a place where we can actually see each other, and rather than create these sort of tribal ideas, and we kind of lump everybody in one big basket, but to truly see one another, and to truly see one another's humanness. So they have a little bit more of a landscape feel because of the atmospheres in it. I also saw a show of quilts that was in Ohio and Columbus, and it also informed a little bit about that patterning, and how we take all these disparate elements and then sew them together and bring them together into a bigger whole. I was thinking of, when I named this one Ruby Slippers, I was thinking of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. She kind of brings me back full circle, where she was a woman looking outside of herself for recognition, looking outside of herself for direction, when all along it was inside her. She had everything she needed. And I think that is a life lesson that I'm learning and trying to learn through my own work. This is a piece I just finished a few weeks ago. Again, that space, trying to create where, when I think of fault lines, I think of where those things shift, but they move because things are dynamic. Rocking the cradle, again, going back to our childhood, this idea of the beginner's mind, where you look at everything as a child, everything that's new, and try to accept everything with that kind of innocence. First light kind of makes a reference to that every moment in Buddhist thought, every moment is a new moment. There is no past, there is no future. It is that moment. And so I kind of refer to that first light of the day. And if we could look at each other through that first moment, that where there is no past, there is no future, just that moment. And these they start again, they have a little bit more of a landscape feel in terms of that space, but lots of veils, lots of shifting patterns. and a little bit more hopeful in their direction. So anyways, I kind of took you through 30 years pretty quickly. But really this, journey continues. I'm trying to learn how to view the world in a new way through my art, and trying to create my art becomes sort of a tapestry of all these different human experiences, and to really learn to see what is, and what I can through my work kind of talk to, show other people about that. But I think my work went from sort of a very personal individual experience to really looking at us as a people from a much broader perspective. So that's it. And is there any questions that anybody might have before we move on?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing all of that in your journey. And as a woman and as a human, it was very nice to hear and relate to. My question, I guess, in your later series, where the shapes kind of became a little bit more abstract, and took on this wonderful play with colors. Still, there's so much of your journey and who you are and your experiences that you captured in the paintings. And my question is, can you speak a little bit to your process? Is it just intuitive and just kind of flows, or do you spend time thinking about, this is what the message I'm trying to portray, and what does that look like or feel like in colors and shapes?
Well, that's a good question. I used to, in my earlier work, I sort of plan things out a little bit more, but I find that my process with the abstraction is a lot more intuitive. I find that it fits with my idea a little bit better if I allow one thing to flow to another, and each new thing informs the next. I often start with an idea that, in terms of forms and shapes, I always have something in my head, but and it always ends, the painting never looks like the original idea, because I allow it to start to tell me what it needs, especially as it moves forward and gets closer to the end. It tells me what it needs, but I also find that I put things in and take things out, and put things in and take things out, which I think also that process replicates what happens in the world, where we layer things over the top and layer things over the top, and then pull things back. So I feel like the process that I use, which is very intuitive, but also is very similar to my thinking and my ideas. I usually start with a sketch, and a rough idea, and I'll draw on the canvas first, but then I do allow a more spontaneous thing to happen.
Nice, thank you. And one more follow-up question. The use of materials, did you find that evolved kind of with you in your journey in your series, or is that just I guess your preference in working with different materials?
I feel like I sometimes chose, I would discover materials that then I find sometimes when I get stuck, I change materials, because it gives me something new to play with, that then starts to get me unstuck. So there's some of that part of my process, like with the alkyd resins, I discovered it, and it gave me a whole new feel that I really started to run with and got really excited with, because it was, and then in that it allowed me to do some things that I couldn't do with my when I was working, say, with wax. Always been very tactile with how I play with the materials. And surface has always been important to me, and layering. So yes, I think that some of it is, I've now worked with so many different materials that as I'm working and I get to a certain part of the painting, I will draw upon different kinds of processes that I worked with in the past or that I'm experimenting with to push the painting a little bit further. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yes, it absolutely does. Thank you.
I have a question. Can
Okay.
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
First of all, thank you. That was fascinating to hear you talk about your work. My struggle seems to be time management, and I don't have any children. I'm not married. Like, my day job is not that intense, in all honesty, and yet I feel like things move like so. It just. I mean, I'm working now while listening. Trying to squeeze in. And I was just wondering how you have accomplished so much and moved so far, and how do you do it? How did you with all the challenges?
I'm old.
I don't think we're that different in age. I was in school in the 80s too.
I'm a very slow painter. I work at glacier speed. When I just was brought on by the James Gallery here in Pittsburgh recently, and I had to let them know, I'm not one of these people that can produce 75 paintings in a year. I have a friend who he sells great with this gallery, but he just cranks work like crazy. I don't know how he does it, but I'm a methodical. I like to think about my work a lot. I like to live with my work a lot, and so I'm a slow painter. But I tell you, it's been hard, especially when I was had my sons living in a group home now. So I mean that made a big difference. But when I was going through tenure, going through promotion, I ran the graduate program.
Oh my
every
God.
every weekend I was in the studio, and that's exhausting. It's exhausting. But I guess you're driven. Luckily, I had summers and I had, winters. It became hard to get work done during the school year. As I got a little bit further along in my career, I just couldn't do it the way that I did. I luckily had a lot of sabbaticals. A lot of the work that you saw was done during sabbaticals, which made a big difference.
So like having big chunks of time.
Okay. Yeah, now,
That's
I've been retired now a year, and it's lovely. I love my teaching job, but I don't feel the pressure that I had. So you just got to keep with it. It's not easy. It's just, I don't know how many of my friends, once they start teaching and after a while, they just cannot balance it all. And, the kids and life and stuff, and, it gets hard. Yeah. But
Thank you so much.
anybody else?
I had a question, Susan. There seemed to be a shift in your color palette. It seemed from the work you showed, it seemed to kind of happen with, there were some pieces with a figure underwater. I don't know if I don't know if it had to do with your interest in Buddhism or when that kind of shift occurred, or maybe there wasn't a shift. Maybe it was more of a transition and it just, so could you talk about your color and how that's kind of developed, your sensibilities about that?
Well, color's always been, well, I'm a painter, so the only thing painters really have is color. If you think about it, it comes in tubes, it's called paint. And I taught color theory for decades. So color is always important to me. I think color to me is the thing that gives the kind of emotional content to the work, not just necessarily the imagery and the sense of light that's in the work. So it would shift depending on the kind of light that I was trying to capture in the work, or the kind of space or time. I worked with really bold colors for a long time, and then I shifted. Sometimes you just sort of do something different, and then like the newer work I'm working on is more muted, a little softer. And I think it's because I want to capture something that's a little bit more in the background, a little bit easier to live with, not in your face as much, because I think that goes with the idea that I'm trying to get across. But when I was working like with that dream imagery, I really wanted that saturated kind of bold color, so I could get this really silhouetted, kind of fearful, scary kind of look to the work. The work that I was doing that was underwater, I don't know if you're talking about the figures. The figures were before the Buddhism. That I don't know why I chose those colors. They just, sometimes I don't know. I often, what I do with my paintings is I will take all my canvases and paint each one a color to like get rid of the white. I never worked directly on white. And so that each one initiates a kind of a different feeling, I will take all my canvases and paint each one a different color to begin with. And so each one will take on, inspire me and trigger different ideas and different things. So that's also part of it. But color is huge. I mean, huge for me. It's always been super important. That's why I always had difficulty, even though I taught painting. And one of the processes I taught in beginning painting was the sort of indirect method where you do things sort of in the black and white, and then you layer the color. I like the real immediate, direct alla prima kind of color. I don't have the patience for that. But I had some students who were absolutely fantastic at it.
And so when you're working too, are you working on multiple pieces at a time, or do you dedicate your energy to one piece, or?
No, I would never get done with anything if it was one at a time. And I don't think that's healthy for the work. I usually have to get to a point in the painting where I hate it and I want to paint it all out and then start all over and destroy it a little bit. I usually have about 5 or 6, depending on the size. I don't have a big studio, but depending on the size, if they're small pieces, I usually have like a dozen at least going at one time. And I find that I bring them all together at the same time. When I get stuck, I can just move to the next one, and I'm constantly making decisions, sometimes out of the corner of my eye when I'm not thinking about it. And I get a lot more done that way. Bigger pieces, I don't have a big studio, but I'll usually have about 5 or 6 pieces, paintings going at one time. Mainly because when I get stuck, I don't want to just stop painting until I figure it out. Sometimes I solve a painting in another painting, something will happen over there that then I can take over to the next painting. So yeah, I never think that's a good idea to just work one at a time. I don't know too many people that do that.
And are you working flat or vertically on the wall, or?
I work vertical. Yeah. Well, the earlier work I would have to pour. I was pouring the resins and they would have to dry. So everything was flat. But right now, I'm just working more traditionally, and I work. And I don't use easels. So you can see I'm in my studio right now. I just hang things on the wall. Anything else?
Anybody else? So I guess if you want to, you can quit sharing your screen, Susan. And if you want to, I guess I wish I have some pictures of the show, but I didn't. I guess I could open some of those up. But if you want to talk about, just generally speaking, before we go through the awards and everything, if you want to talk a little bit about the jury process and just your experience viewing all the works and a little bit, I think people would probably appreciate hearing about that some, because I know that was a challenging task.
Yeah, I just tell you, I was really impressed by the quality of the work. I've juried a lot of shows before, and the overall consistency of quality of work was really excellent. You should be very proud if you were able, if you were juried into the show. I really had to struggle with, especially when I got it narrowed down to about 100. I think it was down to 120, and then each one was sort of Sophie's choice. It was very difficult. I know Mark was with me the whole time. Sure, we can't fit these all in there. So, but anyways, I also, in terms of my process, because there was no theme, which actually I don't tend to like themed shows. I tend to like, especially if it's just representing painting. And since this was supposed to be sort of representing, kind of the genre of painting, it was important to me, I think, to choose the best work that represented the various genres within or traditions within. So there would be work that was figurative, still life work, abstract work, landscape. So I really wanted to pick the best work in each one of those areas. So that was part of my process in terms of thinking. I think overall, the greatest majority of the work was figurative. That definitely took the greatest percentage of the submissions. There's some pretty impressive people that were applying. And some of the way I don't even think I could paint. I mean, some of the figurative work was just astounding how beautiful it was. So when I was picking the award winners, which again was another Sophie's choice, I really again wanted to represent the different genres within the awards, because and so the artists that won the awards, I felt now there were many that I could have given awards to, but those that I ultimately decided upon, I was really looking for people that are work that encompass both content, also excellent technique and craftsmanship, really understood their medium and how to use it. They were really at a very professional level. And they also had some really unique creative solutions, something I haven't seen before. They were really coming up with their own voice, their individual voice. And so that's sort of how I narrowed that part down. That's the show. I saw the pictures that you sent me. The snapshots. I really wish I could be there to see the actual show, but some of the pieces, it's never the same as seeing work over slides, but unfortunately luckily we have that, let's put it that way. But then when you showed me the pieces in the place, it helps to see the scale, I think, in the space and how they hold a wall and how they, I thought that was important too in terms of narrowing things down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how they interact is always a challenge as far as hanging
Right.
the show. Trying to get every piece to really stand on its own and not compete with something else. And so that's always a big puzzle and challenge for me. But it's a beautiful show, and I hate to see it go, but it's been really fantastic. And Derek Smith, actually, he took a video of the show, and so he shared that. There's a link to that he had shared in the chat, and so I'll copy and share that link with everybody. Or maybe if y'all can see the chat, I guess you can copy that link as well. But thank you, Derek, for sharing that. But okay, well, I guess if does anybody have any more questions before we go through the awards? And really, I mean, and for me, and I think for most of us, art is not really competitive in a lot of ways. It's just awards are a great opportunity just to simply recognize some works that are worthy of recognition. Not that they're not all worthy of recognition, because they are.
You got into the show, you deserved an
Oh,
award.
absolutely.
It was I mean, it was a very competitive show.
Yeah.
Very, very competitive.
Yeah, and another juror, another show. I mean, there was so much strong work. I'm so glad that I wasn't the juror because I know it was a challenge. But okay, well, I'm going to share my screen and then we'll look at the award winners. And Sue, if you want to talk a little bit about each piece, what kind of attracted you to that piece, that would be great. Oh, wait a second, I gotta go back here. Let me share my screen. Here we go. And right there. Okay, so I should be sharing my screen. Can y'all see my screen? Yep. Okay, good. All right, so we've got there's a few honorable mentions first, several of those, and then we have third, second, and first place, or best in show. So we'll just kind of go through those. And so the first award of recognition, honorable mention, goes to Benjamin Murphy for his painting titled Noradrenaline Dilation, oil on canvas. And I hate that I didn't put the size on these. This is about, I don't know, it's maybe 24 by 30. But hopefully you've all seen the pictures in the show. This is one of my favorite pieces in the show. It's as far as just non-objective works. I really love it.
I thought this work was really risky in its simplicity, but it's very powerful at the same time. I'm not quite sure if this is atmosphere or form. The colors are really interesting to me. And of course, I love the layering of the pink, but I just thought that in its subtlety, it was very, very powerful. And I also think the form in its simplicity was also very risky. So yeah, I don't know. I always came back to this painting and was moved by it. And having seen my work, I guess you could see why why I liked it, of course.
Yeah,
But
this
I
is
like
definitely one you want to see in person for sure. But it
It has without having form in it necessarily, it has a sense of light. And a directional light. So I don't know. I thought that was a really interesting painting.
And the next honorable mention goes to a painting by Rachel Mendrup called Share Packing Lunches.
I really was attracted to this painting because I thought it was just so timely. Here, in the middle of the pandemic, we are elevating, these are the heroes that got us, or getting us through. I shouldn't say it's not past test, unfortunately. But, just seeing an ordinary person doing an ordinary thing that was an extraordinary, kind of sacrifice and how fortunate we are to have them. And also, I think the traditional approach to the painting sort of fit with that, sort of the everyday, using that kind of everyday process to an everyday scene, but elevating it to fine art, to draw attention to these people who were true heroes in our time, So I just felt it was very timely.
Next honorable mention goes to Justina Kieselwitz for her Salvatore Mundi. And this piece, I think it's about 24 by 24, maybe 20 by 20, maybe a little smaller.
This painting just, kind of blows me away in terms of the ability to paint. I mean, this portraiture is just amazing, the detail, but also the unusual choices of subject matter, and the transparencies of these forms. And and it's just fun, but the detail, the creativity of the objects she used sort of as to stand in for metaphors. Just a beautiful, exquisite painting.
Yeah, and I guess it was just coincidence. Interesting. There were several paintings that actually had balloons and unicorns in them. It was just kind of interesting.
I know. I think that was, you never know, but yep.
Um,
They were all very good too.
yeah. Okay, and the next honorable mention goes to Karen Kirschner for Red Scene, and this one I think it's about 36 by 36, maybe a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, I felt like when I looked to abstract work or for abstract work, I really try to see, a unique vision, something, that's very much their own. And this one had this sort of sense of like jazz to it or something, and also architectural, um, and how it kind of in some ways sort of reminds me of what is it, the Red Studio of Matisse,
Yeah.
in terms of the color in the line work, and how it sort of moves and plays across a canvas and has a sense of depth to it, but it's still somewhat flat. So I really thought this was interesting. It's hard to, it's really, really, people think abstract art is easy to do, but it's really hard.
All right.
This work.
The next honorable mention goes to Teresa Jarzinski for Reflection with Two Plants. I think Teresa was here with us tonight, or maybe she still is. But congratulations.
Hi.
I thought it was you. I really love this piece. When I saw it actually in the image, the show where you sent me the images of the actual installation, I just loved how this really, held the wall in its subtlety. It reminded me a little bit of the Death of Moran, with that beautiful gray space that's very psychological, but also sort of the interesting little off pose where she's a sense of movement, but also the face is pretty static. I kind of liked how that she was sort of a little off in terms of her, like she was tilting a little bit, and they gave it a lot of movement. But I also liked how that gray space that you were working with really created this interesting atmosphere. So I like this one. I particularly liked how it held on the wall. I mean, how it looked within the show.
Mm-hmm.
So congratulations.
Yeah. The next honorable mention goes to Heidi Bruckner for Tween. And I think Heidi might be here with us as well. I don't see your face, but I see your name on the screen.
I'm here. Wow,
Okay.
That's really cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, Heidi. I love this piece. I can see you've been looking at Bonnard, and I just love how you're using color and light in this piece. And I love how you've got this kind of snapshot of a movement, and a look on the face that's, I can feel being in the room with this person, and a sort of an awkwardness that we associate with being tween, and kind of being a little exposed but wanting to be in the shadows, but also how you handled the kind of Bonnard color of temperature. It was really, really strong. I love this piece, and it's very difficult to create that kind of pattern and let it sink back into the distance, and also play with the light on the floor where the shadow, you're really doing a great job of playing with the color to create that shadow and light. But I really like this piece the minute I saw it. And you have an interesting way of installing the work as well, because it's must be you say canvas, so it must be like a raw canvas or something that then you painted on top of it. You didn't stretch it.
Yeah, it hangs from like a rod, like more like a textile piece would. And it's something about that. I started doing it at well, first of all, it's really easy to send and roll, and it's much cheaper. But
Good idea.
also, there's sort of this presence that comes off the wall, I found, that I find interesting as well. And then I like that kind of that almost scroll-like feeling where it becomes an image out of something that's very tiny. So there are a few reasons why I started doing that, but Thank you so much, Susan. That's a terrific.
You're welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
the one who did the work, not me.
Oh,
Yeah, well, congratulations.
thank you so much.
Yes, great piece. All right, and then our final honorable mention goes to Meg Aubrey for Game Mom. And this one's about, I think it's like 24 by 18 or something like that. It's a great piece. Another wonderful figurative work, many figurative works in the show. But,
There are a lot of figurative works, all well done too. I think even though this is a small, I would think 18 by 24, whatever is small, it holds a presence of being a much bigger painting. So I think I could see this also as like a 5 by 6 foot painting. But I like the cerebral aspects of this. The other work that I chose was much more, the color and the ideas were a little bit more psychological or emotional. This one is much more cerebral in terms of how she's juxtaposing these odd things together, where you really forces the viewer to kind of try to figure out this impending storm. And then there's this escape hatch, but here's mom, sort of pretending like everything's just fine. But there's a storm brewing in the back and she's figuring out how she's going to get out real quick. So I like the idea that the viewer has to come in and sort of complete the narrative. The narrative's very vague and esoteric. I've always liked that kind of work where you have to really think through, what it's about, but it's, I just thought those were really interesting juxtaposition of ideas and images.
Yeah, it's a great piece. Okay, so now third place. Third place goes to Sarah Bielski. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the last name right. For Pearl Necklace. And this one, I think it's about maybe also about 18 by 20, maybe a little taller than that.
Yeah, she's from Statesboro, Georgia. That's where I used to teach at Georgia Southern University. So I don't know if she's a faculty member there or what, but I don't know her, but I do know Statesboro, and I have a lot of friends who still teach there. But anyways, I thought I liked not only the skill here of how, every single piece of grass, I just love that texture that she created, but also her statement that she wrote was really well done. And it really helped, because I did actually look at your artist statements when I got down to the nitty gritty. I went over them and they helped me a lot understand, what you were thinking when you're doing the work. But I love how the pearls are starting, very feminist point of view, of course, where the pearls are starting to, melt away. So I just really liked how she was using the still life as a metaphor, and the choices of objects and images that she was using. And of course, it was just exquisitely painted. Just a beautiful painting.
Yep.
So and I also like that bold black shape standing in for the figure. I just, with the pearls on it, there's just something, kind of interesting about that.
And the subtle sense of light across the black form too is just it's really an amazing work.
She can definitely paint.
Yeah. All right, so second place goes to Jason Stout for his painting Still Life Delirium May. And this one, I think it's about 16 by 24. It's a great piece.
I think it's a little bit larger than that, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah, because you have that, it was you first walk in, I think, unless.
Yeah.
Anyways, I kind of like the reference, kind of a play on Cezanne a little bit in terms of bringing him into the modern. And I like how he collapses the flat with the three-dimensional. When I look at, as I said before, when I look at abstract work, I really try to look for work that I haven't seen before. Somebody trying to do something new with it. And I felt like he was trying to, he has his own language, he has his own voice here, playing with scale and the color and all that. It's really interesting space that he creates.
Yeah, it's a great piece. Okay, and then the final best in show goes to Anat Macaulay, and I think I'm pronouncing the last name right, for When Demons Run the Show, and she's here with us.
Yes. Oh
So
my
congratulations.
God.
I had a hard time deciding between the two pieces that are in the show, which one was I was going to give the award to, because I love both of your paintings. They are both beautiful. But
Thank you.
when I saw this in
Oh.
the installation, and it spoke to me from all the way across the room. I mean, it just sort of came out and grabbed me. You know, partly it's the color, obviously, but and obviously your exquisite ability to paint here. Do you use sort of an indirect method when you paint, or where you do the glazing, or are you going direct to the color?
I do. So I start the painting indirect, and as I journey through my process and the piece, I actually find myself working sometimes indirectly.
Okay.
For example, the face was an indirect process, but the much of the ruffles were direct.
Huh.
Prima, yeah. So I just kind of find my way, and like you said, it kind of tells me, what it wants and even how it wants to be painted.
Well, part of the reason I chose this piece was not only because of the skill, obviously, of the painting, which is amazing, and your use of light and color, but also I liked what you were doing with the idea, the image, you having a clown, which is sort of a representation or an illusion. There's all this makeup, the person isn't there, but then you're kind of, using painting as an illusion. So there was this really kind of tension between representation, both with the paint and the process, as well as the images that you chose. And so I thought that was a very interesting, combination of ideas. I don't know if you intended that, but that's sort of how I read it.
I did, and it's even lovelier to hear that's how it came across. And thank you so much.
Good. Good. Well, congratulations. Both of your works are really beautiful. We actually had several people that submitted work that we had, because your other piece has like, what do you call it? Cupcakes and that sort of thing in it, right?
Yeah, and it's about youthful indulgence. That one, yes. So
right. And there was another artist that was also had submitted, but I guess she didn't have the work to show or something, but it had also had some, it was interesting. There was all these food images and a lot of portraits, and I don't know, it was hard to decide, but you did beautiful work, and you should be very, very proud of it.
Thank you so much, and I'm delighted to be part of this show and share those walls with so many other great artists. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, everyone. You did a great job.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
Susan,
welcome. Yes.
Can I can, is it okay to say something
Sure.
The piece, the reflection with two plants, and I'm sure I included this in my application because I consider it part of the title, but you hadn't mentioned anything, so I just kind of want to come clean and make sure that I wasn't trying to hide anything. That's a take on or an appropriation of the Lucian Freud self-portrait, Reflection with Two Children.
Okay.
So I want people to know that. I would never try to hide that, and I've submitted it to a variety of things, and I'm pretty sure I always include that in the title, because I would hate for somebody to think that I'm trying to take credit. Like it's purposely supposed to be like, he's got two kids. I don't have kids. I've got two plants. That, and he's on this side. I'm, so I just want to kind of, make sure that that's out there. Like if somebody were to say that I was came up with that composition and stuff, it's definitely an appropriation or take of or what have you. So I'm just coming clean now. Like,
Okay. Confession. No,
so,
well, a lot,
you
a
know,
lot
but
of
I
artists
think I
will.
included that. I'm really sure I am, you know, so I'm hoping like that's somewhere in my application. It was there.
It's
So,
a beautiful
you know,
painting, and I think you gave your own take on that. So I didn't
well,
see
thank
the
you.
relationship to Lucian Freud there, but it's a nice painting. You painted this painting.
I painted it with a mirror. I painted it in off observe, like I stood, and yeah, it's
Okay.
quarantine.
Oh, is this a self-portrait? Is this of you?
Yes, yeah.
Oh.
So it
And
was a
that's
long.
probably why you're to the side. Now I understand how that happened. I think that's why I like the painting, because of this kind of odd angle. But now I understand where that came from, because you were painting and looking around the canvas,
And that
probably. Here.
and Lucian Freud helped with
Right.
that. So really need that to be out in the open.
That's okay.
But anyway, I don't mean to take the time or energy from
No,
anything.
congratulations.
I just wanted
Quite all
to
right.
make sure people know. Thank you.
Very good.
So, is there any more questions or comments or anything? It's great having everybody here and so many of the artists. And Susan, it's great having you, and wonderful working with you. And thank you so much for sharing your work. It was great to see so much of your work, and just really enjoyed it very much. It's been a great show and just a good experience.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a great experience on my end as well. So thank you. And I guess I'll say good evening to everybody, and congratulations to all the artists.
All right. Thank you, Susan. And thank you, everybody, for being here. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Y'all stay safe and be well, and hopefully everybody will get your paintings back very soon. So we have our work cut out for us. So y'all have a great night. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. I'll see you later, Mark.
Okay, Susan. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.